the only place to start with the trade deadline, at least where we're at here, is the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors are 2-3 on their 7-game Western trip. I think their remaining games are at Houston and at Memphis, but they're 2-3. It's not turning around for them, and the whole league is in a circle around the Raptors watching what they're going to do. And Bontemps, you were in Toronto a month ago. You were writing about this exact same thing. You were foreseeing that the Raptors are going to control the deadline, and it has only been magnified. And so, I mean, the Raptors could trade 4 players by next week. They could trade 1 player. They could trade 2 players. They could trade, some combination. They could trade 4 players. To me, the whole deadline pivots on the Raptors. You have a good familiarity with what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, we're really in the same place we've been in since the start of January. The Raptors were going to wait until they got back from this road trip to decide what they were going to do. They were going to take it down to the wire, and then they were going to decide probably at 2:30 next Thursday afternoon, what they're going to do one way or the other. I think, they're still a game and a half out of 10th with this play-in tournament. It does, I think if you look at Masai Ujiri's history, he has tended to be pretty conservative in these types of situations. They haven't made, they were in lots of discussions for Kyle Lowry, famously, a few years ago. Ended up not trading him at the deadline when Philly and the Lakers and Miami were all trying to get him then. They ended up getting him to Miami later in a sign and trade in the offseason. It wouldn't be stunning to me if a similar thing plays out here, where there's all this talk about what the Raptors are going to do and they wind up doing nothing. But certainly when you talk about the possibility for this deadline to be fairly mundane or very interesting, there's no question that if the Raptors really decide to push their chips into the middle of the table with guys like Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent, they do have the ability to make this a pretty blockbuster trade deadline. But I think it's more likely that, like you said, they end up being on the smaller end of that scale, where maybe one of the guards, Gary Trent or Fred VanVleet, ends up getting moved, as they're both potential unrestricted free agents in a few months. But I just, based off Toronto's history and sort of the way they've approached all this stuff, I don't think we're going to get, I would guess we're not going to get the blockbuster massive trades that everybody who's sort of waiting for excitement at the deadline would want to see.
McMahon, a key thing to me is I've talked to people in the league in the last 48 hours. If the Raptors move, because Woj talked last week about the possibility of 3 first-round picks for a guy like OG Anunoby. But there's some belief that if the Raptors decide to sell, that they may not prioritize draft picks, that they may prioritize young players, because they have Scotty Barnes in-house. I would be stunned if they trade Siakam. But
yes,
I think that's the least likely thing to be traded. And if you have Siakam,
I would agree with that too.
So if they're going to trade OG, I think there's an auction that develops, and I think you got 2 different types of bidders: teams that are willing to offer draft picks and teams that can offer young players, McMahon. And that would be first question: do the Raptors sell? Second question: what kind of sale is it going to be?
Well, and I think that there's also teams that might be able to give you some of both, right? And I've talked a lot about how great a fit I think that Anunoby could be in Memphis. How much they have a lot of young players, right? How much do the Raptors like guys like Zaire Williams, Santi Aldama, David Roddy, Jake LaRavia? I don't know. New Orleans, how much they've got a lot of young talent there.
This is the one. New Orleans is the one. Okay.
And both those teams also have both, I believe, 1 extra pick to play with, plus all of their own. So, like I said, there can be a combination type of deal with those teams. Look, I think I agree with you. Siakam would be very surprising. Barnes is obviously completely off the limits. Other than that, to me, like, are you paying Fred VanVleet? Because it's either get something now. I guess you could argue that there could be an opportunity for you to do a sign and trade, but you're hearing a lot of murmurs about, I'll just go ahead and say, you're hearing a lot of murmurs about, hey, the Orlando Magic are willing to throw a lot of money his way this summer. and they don't need help in a sign and trade. That they've got cap space,
and a need for a point guard.
So the Clippers have, we talked about this on the hit YouTube show Howdy Partners this week, where Wendy got those fingers firing and was my most high profile guest yet. No disrespect to the USWB, the Urine Soak Wet Blanket Tim Bontemps, but the Clippers do have some young talent. If they're talking about, hey, Terrence Mann, BJ Boston, those type of players, Luke Kennard makes some salary work. They do have an extra pick. If they want to be aggressive going after Van Vliet, they can. But Anunoby's really the one where if the Raptors are looking to kind of renovate that roster and get a haul in return around Siakam and Barnes, I think Anunoby's the one where you're really going to get a bidding war.
All right, I'm going to list the teams that I think would consider. Do we all have that word right? Consider a bid for Anunoby if he were available. Let's say that again. Consider if. I'm going to start with New Orleans because they have picks. They have their own picks. They have the Lakers pick and swap this year. I should say they don't have the Lakers pick. They have the swap this year. They have a future Lakers pick as well, but they can trade the swap. They also have some really nice young players from Trey Murphy, Dyson Daniels, Herb Jones. They have Devontae Graham, who they could use as ballast in a trade. They have Jackson Hayes, who I think potentially could be available in a trade. They can offer a whole bunch of different stuff. Now, what they're willing to offer, that's a different story.
Right.
But I think that if Toronto were to decide to trade Anunoby, I think Bobby Webster would be on the phone with David Griffin. That would be one of the first calls. They probably
you laid it out right there. Dyson Daniels, the Lakers swap. That to me, if Toronto is looking to do an OG deal, that's the kind of deal that has the kind of upside that Toronto, I think, is going to look at. Like, I don't see, to me, Memphis has not shown any interest in making the kind of trade it would take to get them a guy like OG Anunoby. With the amount of picks that they have to give up, the amount of young players that have to give up. We've seen Memphis time and again pass on every one of these kind of moves and instead stick to we're going to draft, we're going to develop, we're going to have we're going to replace guys like Anthony Melton with younger guys behind them, not going to spend money. And also, if you look at that package of guys, like their young guys are nice. Their picks have some limited upside for a while, given where that team is headed. That New Orleans, you've got a top 10 pick in Dyson Daniels in his rookie year. You've got a Lakers swap that, even though the Lakers are playing better, they certainly got a pretty good chance of being a lottery pick. That those are the kind of premium assets that I think Toronto's going to be looking at over, if I had to guess, if they do a trade over quantity from other teams.
Also, Memphis has kind of let it be known that, they love their core. They don't want to harm it. And I kind of get it.
But we're talking about doing something outside of their core. Bane's off limits, Jackson's off limits, obviously Ja's off limits. I'm talking about young guys who are fringe.
I think they get outbid. I think they get outbid in that scenario. Okay.
What about Phoenix?
Phoenix is interesting. Phoenix owns all their picks going forward. They could put in Cam Johnson potentially. That's a guy who he's 26, 27, needs a contract, but he's ready-made to go in there and play. Would fit nicely. But that to me would be one of those things where is it picks or players? Because the core of Phoenix's offer would probably be multiple future first-round picks. The Knicks are interesting here in an Anunoby discussion. They have all those first-rounders. They also have a couple of attractive young players: Emmanuel Quickley, Quentin Grimes,
Obi Toppin.
I'm just going to say it would make no sense for the Knicks to trade for OG Anunoby to me. I mean, that to me is a lesser version of what they passed on doing this summer.
I agree.
Donovan Mitchell.
I agree. I sort of just have to cover them because I think that they would have a package. I think they can be down.
Are you counting Cam Reddish in the intriguing young players conversation?
I don't know. I think Cam Reddish will get Cam Reddish hasn't seen the court in weeks, so I think he's going to get
Cam Reddish is up.
somewhere.
Cam Reddish is high up there on the list of guys that I think we'll be seeing in a new destination by the time we record this podcast next week.
Really going out on a limb there.
Also, pay attention to the Portland Trailblazers. Last week I had Pelton on. They had just wrapped up this really underwhelming homestand where they had a losing record, 4-5 in 9 games. Now on the record with the Athletic, Jeremy Grant has said he turned down the extension offer from the Blazers. He's going to wait till the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
He's outperformed probably what that is. But they are from all the folks I'm talking to in the league, the Portland is absolutely in a buying mode. They are attempting to add pieces. I've heard them attached to some sort of role-playing bench players that they're interested in. But if Anunoby became available, I think they would be very interested. And you'd probably start an offer there with Shadon Sharp, their lottery pick that they got out of Kentucky. Again, I don't know if they could get outbid, but they have picks. And
that's a pretty attractive chip to start with. You might be trading a guy who ends up playing in multiple All-Star games. He has that kind of talent. It's projection and potential, but he's awfully talented.
So you can.
But
see
again,
why.
that's the kind of. But that again is the kind of premium piece that I think if you see OG get traded, you're going to see. Those I think are the kinds of pieces you're going to be talking about. Remember, it's worth pointing out. Masai's history tends to be, he's a lot like Danny Ainge. It tends to be if a deal gets done, it's one he feels really good about. Right. So I don't, especially since OG's not going to be a free agent this summer, he's going to be extension eligible. It's not like they have to do something now. I think if they move him, they know there's a lot of interest in him. They're going to have to really be bowled over to do a trade, and that's going to require some pretty significant stuff going back to the Raptors.
Am I forgetting about any teams that you could see that if OG is there would be frontline bidders?
The Mavericks are sniffing around. I think it would be extremely difficult for them to get into that conversation given the pieces that they have. The Mavericks are going to explore everything, but I think the most likely scenario is they either stand pat or operate around the fringes. I think they're having conversations now that might set up talks this summer, that type of thing.
Let me toss you one more.
Okay.
What about the Warriors?
I don't see how the Warriors would be able to get a trade done for OG Anunoby.
Wiseman, Kuminga.
Like I said, I don't see how the Warriors are going to get a trade done for OG Anunoby. I just said they need premium assets back. Those are very depreciated. Kuminga's had a pretty good second year, but that's not the same level as those other guys.
Fair enough.
The one thing real quick, just to point out is OG is maybe the most portable player in the league. He could fit on literally any team. I'm talking about sub superstar category. Obviously you're talking
about the most adaptable plug and play type. Yeah.
Obviously, any team you put Giannis or KD or whatever, teams are going to find ways to make those guys work on any team. But you talk about guys just below that level, you put OG Anunoby on any team, he fits. So if some team we haven't talked about, if they end up moving him, comes out of the woodwork and goes after him, it's because you could drop him in anywhere and he's going to be really effective because the stuff he does fits on any team. He's big. He can play several positions across the board. So there's a reason why there's so much interest in him. He could get dropped in on any team and it would make a lot of sense.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus right now.